Number 8. Ford Falcon. The Ford Falcon in 1965 occupied a position that no car navigates comfortably. It had proven the American compact market was real, and the proof had been used to build a car that had now taken most of its buyers. The Falcon debuted in 1960 as the domestic compact that American families would actually purchase, outselling the Corvair, outselling the Rambler, demonstrating to a Ford management that had been skeptical that the American buyer would choose a smaller, simpler car at a price the small car's economics required. The Mustang's engineers had used the Falcon's platform as their foundation, and the Mustang sales department had used the Falcon's buyer as their primary customer. By 1965, the Falcon was selling in the mid-100,000 unit range to the buyer who needed the practical version of the proposition the Mustang had made famous. Its inline-six options, its four-door sedan and station wagon configurations, and its price below the Mustang's gave the Falcon buyer the compact Ford argument without the performance premium. The Falcon is at number 8 because the car that created the compact market the Mustang inherited was still selling in six-figure volumes in 1965 to buyers who needed the workhorse version of what the Mustang had turned into a phenomenon, and because the car that made the Mustang possible rarely receives the acknowledgement that the historical sequence suggests it deserves. Number 7. Volkswagen Beetle. The Volkswagen Beetle in 1965 was selling on a proposition that the American automotive industry had decided was incompatible with commercial success, that less, presented honestly, was more. 40 horsepower, an air-cooled engine with no coolant system to fail, a heater that operated on optimism rather than engineering, a price of approximately $1,600 positioned below everything Detroit was offering. In the same year, it was selling Impalas with 327 cubic-inch V8s and Mustangs with optional 289s. The Beetle was approaching 200,000 American sales in 1965, on its way to a 1968 peak of 423,008 units, building that number through the specific commercial mechanism that advertising cannot replicate: owner recommendation to the next owner, documented in the service records of a car that required fewer of them. The Beetle is at number 7 because in the year the American car achieved its highest single-model sales figure in history and its most culturally transformative debut, Volkswagen sold 200,000 Beetles to Americans who had looked at the choice carefully and concluded that 40 reliable horsepower, a documented service record, and a price below $1,600 solved their actual transportation problem more completely than anything Detroit was preparing to offer at twice the cost. The heater's chronic optimism about its own capabilities was a condition they had negotiated with the purchase price and decided to accept as part of the arrangement. Number 6. Dodge Dart. The Dodge Dart in 1965 had been making one argument since 1963 without modification, without apology, and without the advertising budget that the argument's commercial results suggested it deserved: that the slant-six engine inclined 30 degrees from vertical so that its oil distribution geometry could reach the bearing surfaces it needed to protect throughout an ownership cycle measured in decades rather than years, would outlast every compact powertrain the American market had deployed against it. By 1965, the Dart had been making that argument for 2 years. The mechanic who had serviced one was recommending it to the customer in the next appointment. The neighbor who had driven one past 100,000 miles without an engine intervention was telling the story to the household about to choose its next compact. The Dart sold over 200,000 units in 1965 by accumulating those conversations rather than replacing them with advertising. Its 17 or 225 cubic-inch slant-six and the available 273 cubic-inch V8 covered the compact range without the engineering novelty that Chevrolet was discovering carried consequences its sales forecast had not included. The Dart is at number 6 because 200,000 Americans chose the compact that had been making the same argument for 2 years without modification,
And because the service records those owners were accumulating were becoming the documentation the next generation of compact buyers would use to evaluate everything that followed. Number 5. Ford Galaxy 500. The Ford Galaxy 500 in 1965 was the full-size Ford that several 100,000 American families chose before the LTD had established itself as the luxury tier and before the Mustang had consumed the performance conversation that the Galaxy's 427 cubic inch engine option had briefly occupied. It delivered what the American family sedan was required to deliver: 6-passenger interior, V8 options ranging from the 289 cubic inch small block to the 427 cubic inch big block that NASCAR had validated at Daytona, and a cruise-o-matic automatic that any driver in the household could operate without instruction. The Galaxy was not competing with the Mustang for the buyer's attention. It was providing the answer to a different question. What does a family of 5 in 1965 drive when the family has decided on a Ford? And the answer was the Galaxy in numbers that made it one of the best-selling passenger cars in America. Its fastback roofline in the XL configuration gave the buyer who wanted a sporting full-size Ford that argument without sacrificing the rear seat. The Galaxy is at number 5 because in 1965, while the Mustang consumed every unit of available press attention and the GTO was becoming the subject of every performance conversation, the full-size Ford sold several 100,000 copies to American families who had made a practical decision and found in the Galaxy exactly the correct answer to the question they had actually asked.
Number 4. Pontiac GTO. The Pontiac GTO had been introduced in 1964 as an option package that Pontiac's own sales forecast projected at 5,000 units. It sold 32,450 in its debut year. For 1965, Pontiac doubled down on the package, added 3.1 inches to the overall length, fitted the characteristic stacked quad headlights that identified every Pontiac on the road, and watched American buyers purchase approximately 75,000 of them. The car that John DeLorean had built by installing a 389 cubic inch V8 into the intermediate Tempest platform had generated a sales result that exceeded its internal forecast by a ratio of 6-to-1 in its first year, and it continued growing into its second. The muscle car segment that did not exist before the GTO's 1964 introduction had, by 1965, produced competitors from Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, and Buick, all using the same General Motors A-body architecture and big block V8 logic that DeLorean had pioneered without authorization from the corporation. Its 389 cubic inch V8 with tri-power induction, 360 horsepower through 3 two-barrel carburetors, and the Muncie 4-speed gave the GTO buyer the muscle car experience before the insurance actuaries had fully processed what that meant for the premium. The GTO is at number 4 because 75,000 Americans in 1965 chose the car that had started the era, and because the Camaro, the Chevelle SS, and the Roadrunner all exist because that 75,000 proved the argument. Number 3. Pontiac Bonneville. The Pontiac Bonneville in 1965 was the car that the American family which had arrived in career, in income, in the specific suburban geography that 1965's prosperity had made the destination, chose to communicate that arrival to the neighbor who happened to be watching when it pulled into the driveway. Its 389 cubic inch V8, its turbo hydromatic automatic, and its full-power accessory list gave the buyer the full-size American luxury experience at a Pontiac price, from a division that Motor Trend had just named Car of the Year for 1965, recognizing Pontiac's consistent delivery of performance engineering at a price below Buick, Oldsmobile, and Cadillac. The Bonneville sat at the top of the lineup, above the Catalina and the Star Chief, which made it the natural destination of every Pontiac buyer whose income had grown faster than their brand loyalty had shifted. Its formal roofline, its bucket seat and console option, and Pontiac's stacked quad headlights communicated exactly what the buyer needed communicated, a decision made from choice rather than necessity.
The Bonneville is at number 3 because in the year Pontiac was the third best-selling brand in America, the car at the top of its lineup defined the precise aspiration point for the American family that had not yet made it to Buick, and represented the destination that every successful Pontiac buyer was moving toward as their career continued to advance.
Number 2, Chevrolet Impala. The Chevrolet Impala sold 1,074,925 units in 1965. No single passenger car model in United States automotive history has reached that number since. The F-Series truck, the best-selling vehicle in America for over 40 consecutive years, sold 750,789 in 2023. The 1965 Impala outsold it by more than 300,000. To understand what 1,074,925 units represents, it means that in 1965, approximately 1 in every 40 Americans purchased a new Impala. It means that the most culturally famous car of 1965, the Mustang, which sold 559,451 copies in a performance that the automotive press correctly described as historic, sold barely half as many. The Impala reached that number through a formula that required no cultural moment, no category creation, and no advertising campaign that anyone has remembered for 60 years. It was the correct full-size Chevrolet at the correct price from the correct dealer network. Its 283, 327, or 396 cubic inch V8 options, its coupe, sedan, and convertible configurations, and the Chevrolet dealer in every American county gave each buyer the specific answer their specific question required. The Impala is at number 2 because 1,074,925 Americans chose the full-size Chevrolet in 1965, and because the most purchased passenger car in United States automotive history deserves the acknowledgement that it outsold the car above it by nearly 2-to-1, while generating no cultural moment that anyone has written about since. Number 1. Ford Mustang. The Ford Mustang sold 559,451 units in its first full model year. It had taken 22,000 orders on its first day, April 17, 1964, at a base price of $2,368. Its hardtop, fastback, and convertible configurations, combined with an options list that let the buyer configure a frugal commuter or a genuine performance machine from the same base car, gave the Mustang a flexibility no American car had offered at that price point. Chevrolet scrambled to respond with the Camaro. Pontiac produced the Firebird. Dodge built the Challenger. AMC offered the Javelin. Every one of those cars exists because the Mustang demonstrated in 1965 that the right car at the right price produced numbers the industry's most optimistic forecasts had not reached. The 289 cubic inch V8 with the K-code option produced 271 horsepower at a price that placed genuine performance within reach of the buyer priced out of the GTO's insurance bracket. A white Mustang convertible had appeared in Goldfinger the year before. Sports Illustrated had it on its cover. The car had arrived in the cultural conversation at the same moment it arrived at the dealership.